Hey guys, so I made a video recently about my top 10 favorite GameCube games, and I really liked how that turned out. So I decided I'm going to do the same thing with the PS2. And so, following the same format, I'm going to list off my top 10 favorite PS2 games, and at the end, I'm going to list some honorable mentions that, didn't make the list. And sort of, you know, in the same way I listed off my top 10 favorite GameCube games, I'm going to list games that I feel like you should play today that are good in 2014. Not games that, were good back when they came out. Because, one thing I will say about the PS2, doing this top 10, I actually had a lot tougher time picking 10 games for this when compared to the GameCube. I say that because I feel like the PS2, while it was the most successful console of all time, very dominant, GameCube and Xbox didn't come close to it in sales. It had like 7,000 games, maybe even more than that. It kind of the games that came out for it were, I sort of said this in my GameCube video, but PS2 games were kind of made to be played at that time, like when they were released. And by that I mean, games like Tekken Tag Tournament. It was really impressive when it came out, and yet there's no reason you'd ever want to go back and play it now. The games that define the PS2 when the console was still new, they don't really matter anymore. Like, you associate Madden with PS2. Why would you want to play an old Madden game? Grand Theft Auto, I wouldn't really recommend playing many of those today, now that 5 is out. Stuff like that. It is kind of weird how, after all the hype has died down, which games, are still worth playing today. So that's why I had an issue with, selecting 10 great games that, can still be played today. I guess one thing I'll add is that, in this video, there aren't going to be too many first-party Sony games, and I kind of have an interesting relationship with Sony first party. I feel like Sony first party games, it's especially true now, and back when the PS2 came out, to some degree in the PS1 era as well. I feel like Sony games, they're not fun, quote unquote. They're experiential games. Like, for example, for on PS3, like if you can think of any PS3 Sony first party game, let's say Uncharted, Heavy Rain, Beyond Two Souls, um, God of War, they're not mechanically great. They're kind of cinematic. Um, you sort of press buttons and stuff happens randomly. Um, when you think back to Uncharted, you don't really remember the game. You remember like the cutscenes and like the character interactions. So I always felt like Sony had problems in the fun department. So I just I've never really liked Sony first party to be honest. Even in the PS1 era, I thought Crash Bandicoot was kind of mediocre. It's not too bad. I'm not gonna trash it. Parappa, I really like it in theory, but I felt like it was too difficult, too fast, and the mechanics weren't that great anyway. Very creative game though. So yeah, Sony first party game design isn't their thing. Little Big Planet, Tearaway, which I reviewed very recently, which I hated by the way. They're not mechanically sound games. They look good in trailers. Like if you show it to a friend, they'll probably be impressed. But when you're actually playing the game, they're not. All right, that's enough of that. But so yeah, I guess one last thing I'll say before getting to my top 10. Sorry for taking so long with this, by the way. Is that I'm showing this original PS2, which is the one I got back in the day. I wouldn't really recommend using this model if you were to go and play PS2 today. Instead, I'd rather get the PS2 Slim, which I've got here. Let me get it. Yeah, all right. So yeah, here's the PS2 Slim. As you can see, much slimmer, more sleek, very light. It's actually like a technical masterpiece because it doesn't use a power brick. Um, for the AC adapter. Instead, it just uses a regular cable. So yeah, very cool thing to have. It also the boot up menu takes less time, so it loads your games faster. So yeah, I definitely would play on a PS2 Slim. All right, so getting into the top 10. Number 10, we have Guitaru Man, which is kind of an obscure game. The first thing you'll notice is how like cool and evocative the box art is. Has this hand drawn feel. It doesn't look like too many game boxes you come across, especially today, where it's mainly just like a white dude with a brown beard with holding a gun. That's like that comprises 90% of the box art today, sadly. But so Guitar Man's a rhythm game. This is kind of before the Guitar Hero and Rock Band craze. Before those games came out, rhythm games are kind of really quirky and weird. You know, kind of like Parappa the Rapper. This game frequency and stuff like that. Basically, you're a kid, and you have this sidekick dog or whatever, and you have this alter ego called Guitar Man. A lot of Japanese media had like these alter egos. Like I remember Yu-Gi-Oh came out around this time, and obviously that had a dual personality thing. I guess it's kind of like a message to give kids more confidence or something. Sort of that kind of moral. I don't know. I don't pretend to know these things, but so yeah, it's a rhythm game. It has guitar-based music, as the title would indicate, and it mainly uses the analog sticks as the sort of input method. Pretty good game. Rhythm games aren't typically my bag, so this is definitely one of the stronger ones. This did get re-released on the PSP, but like most PSP ports, it wasn't as good as the original, so would recommend getting the PS2 one instead of that. And this game used to be expensive for a while, but they reprinted it, so it's worth probably like $15 these days. So yeah, definitely recommend picking it up. All right, so for number 9, we have Dragon Quest VIII. As you'll see, I have this stupid GameStop sticker on it, and I mentioned it in my GameCube video, but anyone who collects games should have this solution called a Gugon. It helps get rid of these stickers without damaging the box. I just haven't gotten around to doing it with some of these games yet, so I will eventually. So yeah, Dragon Quest is a long-running franchise. It's one of the biggest franchises in Japan, alongside Monster Hunter and Pokemon, and I suppose Mario. But it never really, stuck with U.S. audiences. It never really clicked. I would say it's because, the original Dragon Warrior came out before Americans knew what RPGs were. Like, because back then, people just thought that video games were like action games mainly. Well, not on PC, but on console. So to have this slow turn-based game was kind of like intimidating, especially because a lot of the audience back then were young children, so it required a lot of reading, and it just we weren't really ready for these kind of games yet. And the series never really had its Final Fantasy VII, which sort of, Final Fantasy VII popularized the series and the genre. Dragon Quest never really had that because it's always a very traditional series. They're all kind of similar to each other except for 9 and 10. They're very traditional RPGs. And in Japan, everyone plays this game. Like women, children, older people. It's kind of a cultural touchstone. Kind of like I'd say Pokemon was here back in the late 90s. And Dragon Quest is still really popular today. They still come out. So basically, Dragon Quest is known as like a really approachable RPG with charming dialogue. And you'll notice that the characters look a lot like Dragon Ball Z characters because, the characters are drawn by the same guy who made Dragon Ball Z. I think it's Akira Toriyama. It's been a long time since I've really said his name, so could be wrong. I think it is him, though. So, yeah, very recognizable characters if you've seen DBZ. And like I said, it's very approachable. When you die, you don't like it doesn't start you off at the main menu. It's kind of like Pokemon, where once you die, you sort of respawn with a little less gold or money or whatever. So pretty much anyone can beat these games. That's sort of what's led to, or allowed it to maintain its popularity among casual players. I think Dragon Quest VIII in general looks really great. It's one of the best looking PS2 games. It's a really charming and cartoony art style, kind of like Wind Waker, but not really. It's not cel shaded, but it kind of looks like Wind Waker HD actually. It's like 3D cartoons pretty much. Um, and yeah, I guess one way they try to make Americans buy this game is to include a demo of Final Fantasy 12. So that's why the box is a little bit bigger than the typical PS2 box. So yeah, but otherwise, Dragon Quest VIII, a very cool game, a very long game too. So it's always hard to play RPGs, long RPGs, especially once you get a little older. But still highly recommended. All right, so for number 8, we have Silent Hill 2, yet another sticker. Typically I don't like getting greatest hits games or stuff like that because they look kind of tacky, but I specifically wanted to get this game or this variant because they released the original Silent Hill 2, and then later they ported it to Xbox with new features. And then once the greatest hits version came out, it included all those Xbox features and has some more stuff in it. So the greatest hits version is actually the best version. They did release Silent Hill HD collection with 2 and 3, I believe, but from what I understand, those were inferior ports. It has completely new voice acting, which apparently isn't very good. So I would still recommend getting this version. So to talk about the game itself, it's a survival horror game. Resident Evil sort of relies on jump scares and conventional horror, tropes. Silent Hill is more of a psychological thriller. It has a lot of messed up stuff in it. It's not really about combat. It's more about running away from danger. And the environment is so foreboding that you always walk a little slowly because you're afraid of what's coming up next. And it's really clear because especially when you replay the game, you go through the game a lot quicker because you know where the bad guys are and aren't. So you can just beat the game really quickly the second time. So that kind of indicates to you how how well the world sort of intimidates you into playing it slower. So that's a really cool thing. I don't know. It just feels it has a really singular vision from the creator. I forget his name, but it has such great sound design. It's one of the few video games that sort of make you think a little bit. So it's another reason why I like it. Unfortunately, the Silent Hill series has kind of died. They've sort of given it to random B and C tier developers, and they haven't turned out great. The original Silent Hill team got disbanded for some reason, so that's unfortunate, but even so, Silent Hill 2, pretty damn good. Alright, so for number 7, Persona 4. It's weird because I reviewed Persona 4 Golden around the time it came out on the Vita, and it instantly became one of my favorite games of all time. As I sort of explained why in that video. Because that was the first time I played it. I have this, but I actually haven't played too much of it. And from what I understand, the Vita version is a lot better. It just feels more natural on that platform, and I don't know. It just felt like a perfect Vita game to me. That's why this game isn't higher on the list. So I guess to summarize some of the things I love about Persona 4, I'm not going to reiterate everything I said on that other video, but it's an RPG that it makes you feel attached to the characters in the world. Like a lot of games have you stuck in their world for 80, 100 hours, and who cares? But in this, you're playing it for 80 hours, and that's what makes you attached to all the characters. you get to know each individual character. They each have their own story arcs. Um, you know, you really get sentimental at the end, when you say goodbye to these characters. And the battling, or the battle system rather, it incorporates some of the stuff you do, some of your character interactions into the actual battle. So when you make friends with certain characters, that improves your battling in a way. Sorry if I'm not explaining it right, but I just think it's cool when the battling and the story sort of, merge into something. Where I feel like in Final Fantasy, like, you're not really sure why you're facing these random monsters. Like, it seems completely separate from the story, which is why. Well, I'll get into Final Fantasy later in this video. So, but yeah, Persona 4, obviously a great game. Better on Vita though, in my opinion. All right, for number 6, we have Katamari Damacy. This was a typical sleeper hit, I guess. It came out at a reduced price at $30 when it came out. They weren't feeling too confident about this game, I guess. And as you can see by the box, it's a very unique sort of game. It basically involves you rolling around, sort of absorbing everything in your path, and the objective is to get as big as possible. It's a really chill game, not too difficult, and has really killer Japanese music. That's probably the best thing about the game, the soundtrack. And this game, there weren't too many games like this when it came out. It feels a lot like sort of the indie game community scene now. Where they make these small games, with a different vibe from the AAA games you see today. This was one of the pioneers of that sort of indie mentality. Very whimsical game. Unfortunately, as artistic as this game is, they sort of hoarded out by releasing like 15 different versions after that, and the series kind of died in terms of relevance. Like, no one really cares about this series anymore, despite the fact that they loved it when when it came out. I'd still say this is the best version out of those 15,000 versions. So to this day, still a very good game. It was expensive for a while, but they did reprint it, so I think it's like $10 now. So no reason not to pick this up. All right, so we're getting into the top 5. Number 5, we have MLB Power Pros 2008. It's kind of hard to talk about sports games on the internet. Sports games, sports is like, you either love it or you hate it. Like on a place like NeoGAF, if you want to talk about Madden, you're gonna have a lot of trouble because, for whatever reason, if you're not into sports games, you just ignore them completely. So, but I think this game appeals to people who play video games mainly because, first of all, the mechanics are really simple, kind of like 8 and 16-bit sports games were. Like, how anyone could play them basically. This is pretty simple. Just standard stuff. It's not like MLB The Show where it's like it took me like 20 games to finally figure out how to hit the ball consistently. So this isn't like that. It also has a kind of cartoony art style, as you can see on the box. But I think it has a deceptively, quote unquote kiddie art style because the game has a ton of depth to it. It has a ton of stat tracking. It has a season mode, which is, better than something like Madden, which I play every year. It also has this thing called success mode, which is the best part of the game, where it's basically this like text-based RPG where you create a player and he goes into the minor league system, which is the sort of system Major League Baseball players have to go to before they hit the big leagues. And you have to work your way up to the big leagues. And there are dialogue options, and depending on how you do, your stats increase. And there are a lot of different variables, a lot of story-based things happen. You can get a girlfriend randomly. So yeah, it's kind of what I've always wanted in a sports game, an actual story. and the game is surprisingly brutal if you don't do well. Like if you fail to do the last challenge at the end, your dad will pretty much disown you and say you're a failure, and you're gonna have to retry the mode again. It's very for a 2008 game. It's very like brutal, and games don't really do that anymore. So that's kind of why I like it too. But yeah, MLB Power Pros 2008, very good game. If you're not into games like MLB The Show, I would definitely play this game. All right, for number 4, one of my favorite games of all time, Mega Man X Collection. So this has the first 6 Mega Man X games, so 1 through 6. It also has I think that's one of the racing games, like Mega Man Battle Chase or something. It was some crappy PS1 racing game. They just threw that in randomly. So Mega Man X, I love this series. It's one of my favorite series. Period. Mega Man in general. I mean, I say it's my third favorite, behind only Mario and Zelda. And you know, I've pretty much always loved Mega Man since I was 4 years old. Pretty much. I just when people say action game, Mega Man is what I think about. And I guess I'll tell this story. I remember, when I was 14 or 15, like one of my daydreams in the school or whatever was that I would be in the crowd at E3 to witness Mega Man 9 being announced. It's such a weird memory I have, but it's not even that I dreamed of making the game. It's that I would just be at E3 when it was announced. I love this series, and Mega Man 9 did ultimately come out, and it's actually my favorite original Mega Man. You know, it's one of my favorite Mega Man games. Period. So, yeah, Mega Man X Collection. Like I said, I associate action games with Mega Man. I feel like the controls are just perfect. Um, Especially on PS2, the DualShock. I think it's perfect for Mega Man games. There's just nothing better than playing Mega Man X, 4 with a DualShock, in my opinion. That's just as good as gaming gets for me. And unfortunately, the series never got as popular as I think it deserves to be. I guess it's because it's kind of challenging, but it's not too difficult. I mean, you're gonna die 1 or 2 times every level, but you know, it's doable, except for Mega Man X6, which I might get into in a bit. But yeah, the controls are perfect. They're so good that I got spoiled by them, and I can't play games like Mega Man Zero because they feel weird on the GBA. And I tried Mega Man X3 on the Sega Saturn, and I can't play it with that controller, so it's just perfect on the DualShock and pretty good on the Super Nintendo controller as well. Um, so I guess I'll go through all 6 X games. Mega Man X, it's a very cohesive game. It's probably the most well thought out of the 6 because beating a level affects the other levels too. So it just felt like I said, very cohesive, and it had like a singular vision to it. And all right, sorry guys, I had a camera issue, but that should be fine now. But anyway, yeah, I thought the power ups for Mega Man X were probably the best in the series of the power ups you get for beating a boss. I mean, um, yeah, I just think it's a really strong game overall. I just think if there's one criticism I have of it, while the music is very memorable, I don't think it's as good as the other games. So yeah, that matters to me a lot in this series because Mega Man, each Mega Man series has a great music. The original series, this, Legends, Zero and stuff like that. So yeah, music is a big deal in the series, and I thought it could have been better in the original game. So Mega Man X2, it's kind of the forgettable game in the series. It's not really necessary, but it is fun. It's just basically more Mega Man X, but like I said, not as cohesive as the first one because the beating a boss doesn't affect the other levels really, and the bosses aren't really memorable. Like I couldn't name all the stages in this game, whereas I could in Mega Man X or other games. So overall, just kind of a meh game. Mega Man X3, I think, is a really strong game. One of my favorites in the series. Um, the Mega Man X3 in this version is the a port of the PlayStation version with less load times, which basically means the music is different and sort of orchestrated, not orchestrated, but sort of arranged. So it sounds a little bit better, not like a Super Nintendo game. And while it is a little bit different, I actually like both versions a lot in terms of the music. So not really a big loss there. Um, it's the first game where you can play as Zero, which is sort of, badass. He's on the cover, but he's like this red character. They do this a lot in Japanese, media where you have this quote unquote badass main character, but then there's like this other guy who's even more badass. Like Sonic does that with Knuckles, but this isn't Sonic, so it's not bad. So that's something at least. Um, yeah, Mega Man X3 very strong game. The Super Nintendo version is very expensive, so this is one of the best ways and cheapest ways to play the game, even if it doesn't have the Super Nintendo music. Mega Man X4 is probably my favorite in the series. It was originally for PlayStation. I thought it had a great music. All the levels were really strong. It's probably the one I played the most alongside the original game. X5, I didn't really like it too much compared to the other games. I thought the music was pretty good, but they tell you the order to face each boss, which is kind of annoying because usually you have to figure it out for yourself. And this they sort of give it away. The levels I thought weren't very good. Um, yeah, it's kind of forgettable overall. X6, that's kind of an interesting game because from what I understand, the series was supposed to end X5, but they're like, hey, this series, still keeps selling reasonably well, so we'll just make another one randomly. So they kind of shat out X6, and from what I understand, it wasn't play tested very much, which is why it's probably the hardest game in all the Mega Man series. Um, I've only beaten it once, and even then I couldn't even beat it with Mega Man. I had to use Zero because it's slightly easier with him. So very tough game, but for that reason I kind of like it, just because it's very difficult. And so yeah, those are the 6X games. Like I said, the racing game that it's included isn't very good. X7 and X8 are also on the PS2, not in this collection, but they're really bad. And X7 is probably one of the worst games I've ever played, so you're probably good to skip those. So yeah, that's Mega Man X collection. If I had to choose one game that I could have on PS2, it would probably be this. And the only reason why it's not higher is because technically these games did appear on other consoles, but it's only as high as it is because I really do love the DualShock controller and feel that this version is the best to play all the X games. So, yep, that is Mega Man X collection. Alright, so for number 3, we have Grand Theft Auto Vice City. I'd say this is probably my favorite Grand Theft Auto game. I sort of mentioned in the beginning of the video that Grand Theft Auto games, you kind of don't really want to play the older ones now. This might be the exception, though. I mean, 3, while it was really groundbreaking in its day, it's kind of limited now. You can sort of appreciate it for what it was, but in terms of, playability, it's not the best. San Andreas, which came after this, I respected it because it had a black main character, which is pretty gutsy even today, 10 years later after the game came out. And I appreciated its scale, but at the same time, I thought it was too big. I didn't like the RPG elements. I generally don't like tacked on RPG elements in games because they make the game seem more contrived, and they want you to sort of like build meters just to lengthen the game randomly. I like it more when they hide stuff like that, like Zelda or something, where they don't constantly shove numbers in your face, so you don't feel like you're running on a treadmill or something. But Vice City itself, I thought it really captured that '80s Miami feel. It had a great soundtrack, probably the best soundtrack of all the GTA games. It has great '80s pop music, rap, rock, and all that. And if you play it today, after playing 4 and 5, it's really it's sort of odd because it's very like unapologetic about how violent it is. Like, it's really cartoony, which makes it a little bit more okay. So I feel like in 4 and 5 they try to make you feel a little bit more bad about killing random civilians. Maybe that's because of how realistic the graphics are in those games, but in this it's the graphics are very rudimentary, so you don't feel as bad, I guess. I don't know. I just think this is it's pretty close between this and 5 in terms of the best one. I thought 5 was really impressive, but the story was just really bad, and I didn't like the characters, so I might give the edge to Vice City, to be honest. But to be honest, I don't really like Grand Theft Auto 4 or San Andreas, so I guess I'm not really a fan of the series. I'm just a fan of like specific GTA games like this and 5. So yeah, that's Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Still holds up to a large degree. All right, so number 2, we've got Eco, and I wasn't sure I wanted to include this game in my list because technically there is a PS3 HD remake of this game in 720p and all that. It is a better version, but I thought this game was too good to not put on the list. It came out in 2001, kind of quietly. It didn't sell very well, and not a lot of people knew about this game. But over the years, it sort of gained a lot of steam in the hardcore gaming community, and eventually it sort of became expensive to buy until the HD collection came out. Basically, it's one of the first games, if not the first games, that tried to sort of be artistic in that it set out to do something and wanted to make you feel a certain way, an emotion, and it's basically a game where you play this the guy on the cover of this box, and you're trying to escape this castle with a girl who's trapped in the game, or who's I guess held captive. It's been a while since I played it. I don't know really why she's there, but basically it's just a big escort mission, which sounds bad, but it actually works really well in this game. You're sort of holding her hand the whole time, and there's sort of a lot of puzzles that involve you and the girl, and that's really touching. It sort of just it makes you feel companionship with another character, which games didn't really do back then. Video games before games like this came out were basically just like a power fantasy where you wanted to feel really strong. But in this, you sort of felt weak, and that's what made it really interesting at the time. A lot of indie games kind of go for that feel now, and I feel like, last year they called it the year of Luigi. I actually called it the year of the white girl, the teenage white girl. Kind of probably because of this game, actually, its influence. Like, I feel like games like The Last of Us, Tomb Raider, Republic on iOS, and BioShock Infinite, you have these female teenage sidekick characters who you're supposed to protect to sort of make you feel a certain way. I felt like it worked better in Nico. It felt natural, but in the games I just mentioned, I just feel like they're just there. It's sort of contrived to make the player feel a certain way. I don't like that trend right now. I think female characters should be used in a better way, personally. But so yeah, that's Eco. I've got a couple more things to say about it, I guess. One thing is that I thought the story was so strong that I actually wrote a short story about it in class because I figured no one else would play this game, so they wouldn't realize that I ripped it off, and it actually went over pretty well. It actually translates really well to like a short story or something. It's very literary. It's very minimal in storytelling too. Like there aren't too many cutscenes or dialogue or anything like that. It's just very atmospheric. I guess problem is that it does have a couple of camera issues. It is an early 3D game, I guess. It was based on a PlayStation game originally, or rather, it was supposed to be a PlayStation 1 game, but they moved it to PS2. So it just has some old game design flaws, but overall, still a very strong game. Though I would play it on PS3, to be honest. The last thing I'll say is that they totally butchered the box art for the North American version. As you can see, this box doesn't really tell you anything about the game. It's sort of like, I can sort of see why the game failed. It's because when you see this box art in the store, you're like, it doesn't really convey what the game is, and it looks really cheesy and bad. when you compare it to the European and Japanese box art, which I'll sort of show here. This is the PS3 version, and this is how it originally looked on PS2. Um, in Japan and Europe, here are them side by side. So I mean, as you can see, the original Japanese box art sort of conveys the feeling you're supposed to get. It's a sort of artistic game, and I mean that's what box art is good for. It sort of shows you what to expect in the game you're about to play. Whereas in the North American version, it's not really appealing and it doesn't set the stage for what the game is trying to do. So that sucked, but fortunately they did fix it with the PS3 version by including the original box art. So it's all good now. All right, so that's Eco. And number one, this is going to surprise and probably anger some of you, but WWE SmackDown, Here Comes the Pain. So this isn't the kind of game you see on top 10 lists. Kind of like what I said about MLB Power Pros. You either like wrestling or you absolutely hate it. It's hard to sell people on the wrestling concept. The common dismissal of it's fake. But hey, guess what? Breaking Bad was fake too. And everything you watch is fake pretty much. So, and that's the thing about wrestling. While it's live, but it's scripted, like theater or something like that. It's very lowbrow theater. That's what wrestling is. And once you understand that, then I think you can get into it. I don't really watch wrestling anymore. I mean, I do like once a year, every March or April or whatever, whenever WrestleMania comes around, just because it's kind of nostalgic for me. But when this game came out, I was really into wrestling. And I played it all the time, pretty much every day, actually. It was the only game I used the PS2's multi-tab for, which basically let you play 4 players. Because unfortunately, the PS2 only had 2 ports, controller ports, so yeah, I used the multi-tap for this. Made a lot of custom characters and traded them with friends, which you can do in this game. It had a ton of match modes or match types. Like Elimination Chamber was my favorite. It's kind of where 6 players are in this big cage-like area, and you can interact with a lot of the environment, and it's really fun. It just has a ton of wrestlers in it. It had a lot of modes. It just felt right. It's probably the best in the SmackDown / WWE series. So I think it's a really strong game. It's probably still the best wrestling game around, even today, unfortunately. I don't know if there's too much else to add about this game, but I guess the reason why it's number one is because it's a game I can still go back and play. And I still have a lot of fun with it, so yeah, while it's not like a quote-unquote internet-friendly game, I still highly recommend SmackDown Here Comes the Pain. Alright, so here's how my top 10 best PlayStation 2 games stack up, literally. PS2 games look pretty good, the spines I mean, so if you collect PS2 games, you're definitely going to like the way they look on the shelf. Alright, so as I did with my GameCube top 10, I'm going to list some honorable mentions and talk about them briefly. So first up we have God Hand, which I actually haven't played yet, unfortunately. It's still sealed. So this was made by Capcom, specifically Clover Studio, who was sort of a group of Capcom elite, developers who made a lot of great games. Some of the games they made were Beautiful Joe on GameCube, Okami on PS2, which I'm not going to talk about here, unfortunately. They made this, God Hand, and stuff like that. They eventually sort of became Platinum Games, who made Vanquish, Wonderful 101, and Bayonetta, and other games like that. So, yeah, this is a really quality group of people. This was directed by Shinji Mikami, who made Resident Evil. And he worked on a lot of Capcom Disney games back in the day, like Aladdin. So yeah, very revered developer. This is kind of a quirky game as far as I know. It's like, I guess, a beat 'em up, but a very customizable one. Very quirky. Some people didn't get it back in the day. I think IGN gave it like a 2 out of 10 or something, which people still laugh at to this day. It's actually a lot of people's favorite game because of how interesting it is. So definitely a game I've been wanting to try out, but just haven't gotten around to it for whatever reason. All right, next up we have Shadow of the Colossus, which is sort of it's It's made by the same people who made Eco. I guess I don't know if it would be a spoiler, but I guess I could say this is a prequel to Eco. It's not like overtly stated that it is, but it pretty much is if you put two and two together. But this is kind of in the same vein in that it's very artistic and it's trying to convey something. It has themes and stuff like a good book would. The reason why it's not on my top 10 list is because I didn't find it too enjoyable to play like I did with Eco. This game basically comprises of a lot of bosses. The game it's pretty much just a series of boss battles, these colossi, and they each have their own way. You have to tackle them differently. They each have their own weaknesses, kind of like Zelda bosses, but a little bit more elaborate and bigger in scale. The only reason why I didn't find it that fun is because the controls were kind of meh. And by the time I got to like the fourth or fifth Colossus, I was like, okay, I kind of get where this game is going. I get it, I don't really need to play anymore. It was just too much. Because the game basically just wants you to feel bad about, fighting these bosses who, they're not doing anything wrong, and yet you're trying to kill them anyway. It's kind of like it's basically the creator examining video games and sort of, it makes you question why you're doing the things you do in video games. It's kind of that. It's pretty meta in that way and very interesting. So I respect it for what it's trying to do, but ultimately as a game I didn't really enjoy it too much. This was remade on PS3 along with Eco in the same collection, so if you want to play this game, it's way better on the PS3 because in the PS2 version it has very stuttery frame rate because the PS2 couldn't really handle this game as much as the developers intended. So definitely better on PS3. An interesting game that I respect, but not one of my favorites. Alright, so Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence. I guess one of the only reasons why it's not on this list is because it was remade on PS3 and Xbox 360 and Vita. And I would also talk about Metal Gear Solid 2, but I don't know where it is right now, so I guess that's another reason why I won't talk about it. I like that a little bit more, by the way. 3 I do like. I like the Metal Gear Solid series quite a bit. But the thing is, this game features a big boss, and I'm more of a Solid Snake guy than a big boss guy. I don't really like the big boss games like Peace Walker and Portable Ops and all those PSP games. I'm more interested in Solid Snake's, saga, so I guess that's the main reason why I'm not as big a fan of 3 as I am of 1, 2, and 4. I did introduce some, important things to the series like CQC, Close Quarters Combat, which sort of makes the melee combat a little bit more tactical and gives you more options. Because in 1 and 2, when you got caught and you tried to fight people, you felt kind of like a fish out of water. Like your melee attacks seemed pretty random, and you weren't sure if they're going to connect. But in 3, they're more precise, and you kind of know what you're doing. So that was important. I thought the boss, which is a character in the game, she's pretty interesting. So I like that element. I do like that the series is kind of a James Bond 1960s parody. I didn't like the sort of I don't know what to call it, but it's like this eating system where you have to eat like snakes and stuff like that to stay, for vitality. And you had to, when you got injured, you had to go press start and sort of fix your ailments with, some mini games, stuff like that. I didn't really like that element to it. I thought the bosses were pretty interesting. Like there was a sniper boss where you had to go and find him, and it was pretty difficult at first if you didn't know what you were doing. And you didn't get too many instructions on how to beat him, so I thought that was a pretty good fight. Yeah, Metal Gear Solid 3, a good game for sure. Just not, my favorite in the series. Alright, so we're getting to Squaresoft. This might be a controversial segment for Square fans, so do keep that in mind. So first we have Final Fantasy X, made by Squaresoft before they merged with Enix to make Square Enix. This gets a lot of love on the internet, kind of like 7 in a way. I kind of feel the same way about 7 and 10 in that I don't really like them. And 10 specifically, it's because I feel like the story is too, it feels like it's a game that's for 13-year-olds. I mean, no offense if you like it, because I like a lot of stuff that 13-year-olds like too. So it's just not my bag. I just looking at the main character, he just seems really annoying. Or not seems, but he actually is annoying. The story is like some amnesia, cliche story. The characterization is really bad. The dialogue is not well written at all. They don't do anything to sort of reel you into the story. Like, I don't really care about the characters, their motivations. I mean, that's the beginning and the end of any good story. If you don't care about the characters, then the story is dead. And the mechanics aren't very deep. You know, they don't really make you think. So, yeah, definitely not a big fan of Final Fantasy X. They did remake 10 and 10-2 on PS3, which I just got a few days ago. I'm gonna give it another try because I haven't played this in a few years, so maybe I'll like it when I play it next time. But we'll see. All right, so next up we have Final Fantasy X-2, which is kind of a sequel. I mean, it's hard to really say. It's a really different thematically. You're kind of playing as the three girls on the cover. They're kind of pop stars in a way. It's like a completely different feel. It's very like goofy, which I kind of like because it's just different. And a lot of games these days aren't very goofy, like the AAA games, like Gears of War, very serious. Call of Duty, very serious. Every game is just so hyper masculine, at least in the AAA space, that you're just like, it's odd to find a game that doesn't treat itself too seriously. So that's kind of why I like this game. I haven't played too much of it, but I'm definitely gonna give it another try in the PS3 version. So that's pretty much all I have to say about that. Alright, so we have Final Fantasy 12. This game kind of had a weird development history. It was supposed to be originally directed by Matsuno, who made Final Fantasy Tactics and Tactics Ogre and a lot of strategy games like that, Vagrant Story. And I think he's not really... He doesn't really like the AAA space, so I guess he didn't feel comfortable working on a game of this size, so he ultimately left due to stress, I guess. So it became something else after he left, and some people call it like a single-player MMO. That's kind of how the mechanics work in this game. It's not really a turn-based game. It's sort of an action-y game where you wait turns and stuff like that, but it's not... I guess kind of like Kingdom Hearts, but a little bit slower. I think this is better than 10, at least. I thought the characters were a little bit more interesting, though the main character, Vaughn, is equally stupid as Tidus, who was the main character of 10. I just think the game was too long. Like, I was into it for like a few hours, but then you sort of lose interest if the game doesn't compel you, So, yeah, it's an okay game. Maybe if they made it on Vita, I would try it again, but yeah, it's Final Fantasy 12. Alright, so next we have Kingdom Hearts. This is kind of a really novel concept originally. This idea that, you're combining a video game with Disney, which is like this really huge establishment. There's kind of their like stamp of approval on the video game industry, that Disney approved of the industry. So it was kind of cool in that way. The game itself, though, it suffers from Square's soft storytelling, which is to say, really like kiddie, like preteen dialogue, and like if you play the beginning of the game, it's basically like 10-year-olds like sitting on the beach licking popsicles, like talking about like what's the word, like philosophy 101 level of discourse. So it's like really, I don't know, I guess if you're like 13 and play this game, you might think it's deep, but even when I was 13 and I tried this game, I didn't really like it. I mean, I to be honest, I actually did like it for a little bit, but it got kind of repetitive. Like, I got to like the third world, and then it got, like, I sort of got the game. It's like, okay, I get it. I'm kind of done. It is kind of fun to go through the Disney worlds and see them interpreted by Square. So, in that way, it's kind of cool, but Kingdom Hearts just isn't for me. I tried it again on PS3. I just don't like the writing. Writing is everything to me when it comes to story, as it should, obviously, and I just don't think the writing is very strong. Alright, and finally we have Persona 3 FES. This is sort of like the ultimate version of 3, because they originally released Persona 3, and then this came out like a little bit afterwards with new content. Um, I played 4 before I played 3. I think if I played 3 first, I'd like it a lot more. But when I played 4, it had so many improvements over 3 that when I went back to this one, I really did miss some of the improvements to make the game a little bit easier. I think the dungeons are a little bit too unforgiving in some ways in 3, but I do love the theme. It's a bit more dark, kind of more emo. In this, like, normally I don't really like emo, but in this, it felt really cool. Like, there's a metaphor of sort of shooting yourself in the head, before each battle starts, which I think is really cool. I just like the characters a lot. Like, even though I haven't played too much of this game, I really love the characters. The music is awesome, as it is in 4, which I forgot to mention, but this is a game I definitely really want to play and get into, but I need them to remake it, kind of like they did with Persona 4 Gold. And they did make it on PSP, but I don't like the PSP, and the PSP version isn't what the game should be. They cut a lot of content, and I'm hoping they do remake Persona 3 on Vita, even though it might be a little bit much because they did already remake the game a few times. So yeah, Persona 3 definitely recommended, but it's not my favorite game, at least yet. Hopefully I will get to it fully one day. Alright, so that is the PlayStation 2. I guess to wrap things up, I'll say that the PS2 era was sort of the last time the Japanese industry sort of led the charge in terms of their relevance. Because, like, when I look at the 2014 releases so far, like Castlevania, Lords of Shadow 2, Final Fantasy 13, Lightning Returns, or whatever, games like that, it's really clear that, Japan is like a huge problem right now in the AAA game space. They're definitely not what they used to be. Nintendo's not doing well right now. The West's completely taken over in terms of relevance, so it's kind of sad to see as someone who grew up with Japanese games, and I actually do slightly prefer Japanese games. I mean, I love games like League of Legends. Like, that's probably the game I play the most right now, but I just feel like Japanese games, they're more polished, the characters are more interesting generally. They take themselves less seriously usually. So it is sad in that way. You did sort of see the rise of Western games coming with games like Halo on the Xbox, Grand Theft Auto. So Western games really were sort of rising in this period, but Japan was still like the king, I guess. So I guess that's the main takeaway for me when it comes to the PS2 and its generation. I'd say the PS1 is still a better system in my opinion in terms of games I'd rather play today. The PS2 is definitely a strong system, and I definitely prefer it over the PS3. That's for sure. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. It's a very long one, but hey, I like making long videos. I'm also thinking of doing a similar video for my DS collection and original Xbox. So look out for those. Maybe I guess. All right. So thanks for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will talk to you guys later.